So of course, today we're going to be talking about cloud security automation. Now, just quick little bit of background, just for your reference. I've got my own consulting practice. I used to be the CISO here at the SANS Institute. I've been teaching and writing courses with SANS for about 12 years now. So that's enough of that. Real quick segue here. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today is automation. Now, a lot of the topics, the ideas, the concepts, and some of the material in this session actually comes from, in the top center column here, the Sec 540 Cloud Security and DevOps Automation class. I'm a co-author of that, along with Ben Allen, Jim Bird, and Eric Johnson. Just FYI. Now, in this session, there are 3 things related to automation that I want to talk about, that I want to share with you guys. Number 1 is automation related to some infrastructure security elements. Number 2 is automation related to your DevOps pipeline. And then finally, number 3 is automation related to, well, some application security related issues that your applications might be having as well. So let's go ahead and start with number 1 here, infrastructure security automation. Now, this is a big topic. So in the limited time that we have here today for each of these 3 topics, I want to share just one small aspect about this particular topic, and then do a simple, quick, basic demo for each of these 3 different items. Sound good? So for number 1, infrastructure security here, the first thing that I want to talk about, use as an example, is something that came up in conversation earlier today. Someone mentioned this before, I can't remember who, but it was Cloud Custodian. Free, open source tool, originally created by Kapil Thengavelu from Capital One. Now, this is a tool that allows you to not only look at the security of your various cloud providers, started with AWS, they've got some Azure support, they've got some GCP support in alpha format as well. Quick show of hands. Who here uses Cloud Custodian in their environments? Just a handful of folks here. Very cool, powerful, useful tool. Some example policies that are security related are listed down here at the bottom. Now, Cloud Custodian does a number of things, but some of the items that I've pulled out and listed on this particular slide are related more towards the automation-related things that ideally we'd want to have handled automatically for us, automatically detecting root logins, automatically blocking resources in non-standard regions. As we know, there are many different AWS regions. Your organization might only be deploying infrastructure services in some of those regions. In those particular cases, if you see something spun up from a non-standard region, well, you might want to stop that. Number 3, configuring your ELB, your Elastic Load Balancer, to make sure that it is using certain specific TLS, transport layer security ciphers and protocols, configuring specific settings to what Will mentioned earlier, blocking insecure S3 bucket configurations. And the one that we're going to dive into a little bit more today in the very next slide is detecting and remediating security group violations. Now, this is a basic example, as I mentioned, but this is very easy for somebody with console access, API access, to potentially enable world access 0.0.0.0 to some of your resources by misconfiguring, on accident hopefully, some security groups. Now, Cloud Custodian is a tool that's written in Python. Now, under the covers, well, how do you configure it? How do you use the tool? Here on the next slide, we've got an example of a Cloud Custodian policy document. Now, I've highlighted what I think are the most important parts of this particular policy, so your eyes don't have to bleed trying to read this entire thing. First, at the top is, well, what is this policy? The name. Well, high-risk security groups, we want to not only identify them, but per this policy, we want to remediate. We want to block. We want to automatically do something about this. In this example, it's specifically, the second highlighted box here is looking for authorizing security group ingress. If it detects this particular activity going on in your account for, specifically, the second box down at the bottom, 0.0.0 that we mentioned, you then want to go ahead and remove that permission as we see at the bottom. Really cool. Now, no longer do we have to just get alerted to that something bad has happened and somebody has to manually do something. Under the covers, when you deploy this policy, well, it actually does a few different things. What's going on under the covers when you call custodian, deploy that particular policy from the command line? Well, as you know, anytime you've got some AWS service-related activity, CloudTrail, automatically there's some logs. There's some activity that's generated in CloudTrail. Cloud Custodian is using those CloudTrail logs that we see on the far left over here. And then when you deploy that Cloud Custodian policy, it is also creating for you a CloudWatch event. That CloudWatch event looks for that authorized security group ingress that we saw on the previous slide. You guys remember that whole slide ago? And it specifically creates a rule that is going to trigger when that particular activity is detected. Well, now that's great. You detect it. Well, then what are you going to do? Cloud Custodian, when you deploy that policy, automatically then, under the covers, creates a Lambda function for you. Now, this Lambda function in particular is going to be what the code that is called to actually remediate, delete that 0.0.world readable access in that particular security group. So this is the basic flow of what's happening under the covers, what gets deployed when you deploy that Cloud Custodian policy. Now, when you create, modify your security group, I mentioned there's some CloudTrail logs that get generated. This is what that CloudTrail log looks like. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the first part of this basic demo that I mentioned here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my AWS console, where I'm already logged in. And you can see I'm specifically in my EC2 area in the security groups settings. And you can see I've got this bad security group that I've specifically created just for example purposes. And if we go ahead and select that, you can see down here at the bottom, there are no inbound rules. I'm just going to go ahead and for the purposes of this example, the screen refresh there, going back to the inbound tab, click edit here, add a new inbound rule that says all TCP/IP, specifically coming from anywhere, as we see here, 0.0.0, any place else on the internet. I'm going to go ahead and add that rule, and click save. And now you can see down here at the bottom, we've got those rules. We're going to keep that in mind. Have a little mental bookmark of what we just did here, because we're going to come back to that in just a few minutes. So I'm going to go back to the slides. The thing that I just did, right, modifying that security group, under the covers has generated this amazing CloudTrail log. As we see at the very top, we've got a timestamp. Keep that timestamp in mind. We're going to see something related to that on the next slide. That authorized security group ingress, second box from the top. And specifically, the security group that we just modified is that SG-security group name in the middle here. But down here at the bottom, we've got that 0.0.0. What did we do? Right, so that CloudWatch event is looking at this CloudTrail log. And on the next slide here, specifically, the CloudWatch event that got created by your Cloud Custodian policy that we saw at the very first slide, it created this CloudWatch event that is specifically looking in the lower left-hand corner for those different events. Authorized security group ingress, what we just did via the console. So then, well, CloudWatch also has some logs. Well, when an event gets kicked off, you can see here, right, we've got our CloudWatch event log that actually occurs. Up here at the very top, we've got a little timestamp. Now, if you memorize that timestamp from the previous slide, you would see that it is less than a minute, right? After the CloudTrail log, after the CloudTrail event log happens, right? CloudWatch then has this event kick off, and then it says, hey, we've got authorized security group ingress. We have detected this in our CloudTrail logs. This security group in the middle was updated specifically to allow all IPs. That's probably not a good thing. So what are we going to do? This CloudWatch event has specifically been created towards the bottom here, invoke this remove permission action. And this remove permission action specifically calls this Lambda function that says, hey, for Cloud Custodian's high-risk security group remediate, let's go ahead and then call some Lambda code that's going to remove that permission automatically for us. Now, this is an example. In your organization, you may or may not decide to do this, but this is just an example of how powerful this combination of the native built-in CloudTrail logging combined with CloudWatch and Lambda can be to automatically remediate, fix, prevent bad things from occurring in your environment as well. So if I go back now, remember in the AWS console, we added that 0.0.0 right here, right, in that bad security group. Now, I'm going to take a chance, and in the upper right-hand corner here, I'm going to click refresh. In the last few minutes that we've been talking, hopefully that Lambda function has kicked off, and now when I click refresh, we're going to see that 0.0.access down at the bottom disappear because Cloud Custodian is doing its work. So now if I click refresh, you can see, yes, down at the very bottom, I have still selected the bad security group, still in the inbound tab, but now all of that access, 0.0.0, is magically gone. Pretty awesome, right? So that is example number one in terms of infrastructure security here. Infrastructure security. So let's pause for a second. I know we have limited time together, but let's see. Any questions, any comments at this point? All right, so with no questions, feel free to interject at any time. The second thing that I said we were going to talk about was, does anybody remember what it was? DevOps, right? We're going to talk about security of our DevOps pipeline and automation related to that. So it's not just, thank you to whoever said that, it's not just the security of our infrastructure that we want to worry about in the cloud. We also want to think about, well, how do we bake security into the process of developing and deploying new systems and applications? And DevOps, the DevSecOps pipeline, is essentially what we're talking about here. Now, the way that we think about the DevOps pipeline, this factory floor, if you will, to get new systems, applications out the door, is thinking about these 5 different DevOps pipeline phases: pre-commit, commit, acceptance, production, all the way to operations, running your systems, running your applications in production itself. Now, we're going to see this in a little bit more detail, but before we get to that, one side note here that I want to mention is we've got this poster, a SANS poster called the Secure DevOps Practices poster. If you want to download a PDF version of it, the link is in the lower left-hand corner of the slide. There's 3 different things on this particular page, though. The top left corner, we've got our Cloud Security Top 10. That, Ben Hagen and Will Bengston, were a couple of the contributors to, right? So their names are listed in the lower right-hand corner. We've got the Serverless Security Top 10 on the lower left-hand corner. Earlier, you saw a talk by Ori Segal from PureSec. He and his team contributed to that as well. But the part that is related to DevOps here is on the right-hand side, what we call our Secure DevOps toolchain. On the prior slide, we just saw the 5 different phases of the DevOps pipeline. Now that went from left to right. In this poster, for graphic design reasons, right, the designer basically said, hey, is it okay if we go top to bottom? So we said, sure. In the top right-hand corner, we've got the pre-commit phase. All the way to the lower right-hand corner, the operations phase. And for each of those different phases, in this hard-to-read, impossible-to-read text are listed a bunch of free open-source tools that you can use to integrate into your pipeline for each of these different phases. Now, conceptually, if we take a step away from those particular tools, well, for each of these phases of the pipeline, you can see that there's a lot of security stuff, security activities that we can do, we can inject into our CI continuous integration, CD continuous delivery pipeline. Now, in the limited time that we have here together today, we can't talk about all of these different boxes, right? We could talk about these boxes and the details associated with them for hours, if not days. So in the time that we have together, I want to just talk about one specific item to use as an example. Now, that is in the middle, towards the bottom, is infrastructure as code, which is a topic that has come up in the last couple of days. Now, infrastructure as code, this is here for your reference. We're not going to go rehash all of the details here. You've probably pretty much heard of cattle and pets. It used to be that we treated servers, right, as pets, giving them unique names like Husker, Apollo, and Starbuck, right, and give them love and care and feeding and pet them and worry about how they were doing at night. But instead, we want to treat, somebody mentioned immutable a little while ago, we want to treat our servers, our infrastructure, like cattle, easily replaceable with one another. And that is the main concept that we want to integrate into our DevSecOps pipeline as well. Now, with this concept comes blue-green deployments. Quick show of hands. Who here is doing blue-green deployments? All right, just a handful of folks. Now, this is not a new concept. This concept of having a blue production environment and having a green non-production environment, and having perhaps both environments up so that anytime you want to deploy a new code change, something new, you then have blue production running, you deploy that change to your green environment, and assuming everything tests out fine, you swap traffic over to the green environment. Have basically zero time downtime or near zero downtime deployments. Make sense? Now, why did so few of us raise our hands when I said who here is doing blue-green deployments? Before the cloud especially, why was it so difficult to do blue-green? Cost, right? Resources, time-consuming. Blue-green in traditional non-cloud environments essentially meant that you had to have an identical set of infrastructure to your production infrastructure up and running. And when you were running your own data center, whether it be colo or your own fully managed data center, that's time-consuming, that's expensive. It takes a lot of people to actually do that. So by leveraging what we have from an immutable infrastructure as code perspective, we can get to a point where we ideally can do faster, quicker, easier blue-green deployments. Now, this is just an example that leverages Amazon AWS's ECS, Elastic Container Service, to have different blue or green instances in your container environment. And in this particular case, this is really highlighting the fact that the blast radius, the radius of any change that occurs, right, in this particular example, is limited to those containers. It doesn't include things like the load balancer that is represented up at the top. It doesn't include things like your database that's not shown on the slide, but the applications would actually be accessing. Now, from a blue-green deployment perspective, if we've got infrastructure as code, if we've got automated deployments through our pipeline, well, we can leverage that then based on code that looks like something like this in this example, basic demo that I'm going to switch to in a moment. On the left-hand side, you've got your production blue environment that is running on, in this example, one specific port, port 443. On the right-hand side, you've got your green, non-prod environment that, in this case, is running on port 444, where you can deploy your new code, your new software that you actually want to test. So let's go ahead and take a look at that really quickly. In this browser, I have two tabs on the far right-hand side that are open. This tab to this fictitious Dunder Mifflin application for this fictitious company is basically one of the portals that this organization has. This is the currently running production environment that, as you can see, right, anybody can get to this. If you type this quick enough, you can get to this vulnerable version of this app. You can see that it is running on AWS right here, and it is by default, it's HTTPS, therefore it's running on port 443. Well, I've got another version of this app in this second tab here, and this second one, you can see, well, yes, this is HTTPS. This is also running on AWS, but it is running on port 444. So if I go back to the first one, if we go ahead and take a look at a basic, make this font a little bit bigger for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and log in, and I'm going to go ahead and log in as one of the users that we've got set up in the system. And it turns out that there is a vulnerability in the My Profile related functionality. So I just logged in as the P. Beasley user. So you can see when the user goes to My Profile, it brings up her profile, Pam Beasley's information here. Well, there's a basic access control vulnerability in this application. If I go up to the URL bar and I go ahead and enter $ID equals 1, zoom back out here so you can see the whole screen, hit enter, you can see that not only does this user can not only see her information, but now she can see Michael Scott's information as well. Just to emphasize that this is actually working, we're going to go ahead and go back up to the URL bar, type in ID equals 2. I'm going to zoom back out, going to go ahead and click enter, and now you can see she sees Jim's information here instead. So your classic case of an access control vulnerability that leads to information disclosure in this particular example. Well, as part of automatically deploying our code through the CI/CD DevOps pipeline that we were talking about, we've now automatically stood up our green infrastructure under the covers here. And as we talked about, we are running this one on port 444. So I'm going to go ahead and log in again as the P. Beasley user. In this second green environment, go to, on the right-hand side, the My Profile feature. And again, back in the URL bar, I'm going to go ahead and say ID equals 1. Zoom back out. Now, before, when we changed ID equals 1 and hit enter, it's changed from P. Beasley to Michael Scott. So now when I hit enter, you can see the page got refreshed, but the information wasn't inadvertently disclosed. Pam can still only see Pam's information. Now, this is a simple, basic demonstration that says, look, we've got two different environments, a blue environment on 443, a green environment on 444, all enabled by the magic of our DevOps pipeline and infrastructure as code. So now, one of the best features that we can have from a security perspective is to be able to deploy and get fixes to production faster. SQL injection, SQL injection, very basic, simple vulnerability. How long, any guesses, how long does it take a developer to fix a SQL injection vulnerability in an application? Seems like a long time. Let's circle back to that very insightful answer in just a moment. In terms of the code change itself, how long does it take the developer to do that fix? 5 minutes. 5 minutes, right? You know Java, you know C#, right? It's very simple, straightforward, easy to actually make the code change itself. But to the point over here, right, it seems like a very long time. I have seen, right, a simple fix like that take days, weeks, sometimes even months to actually make it to the production environment in a large bureaucratic enterprise. Why is that the case? It's not just about the code fix, it's about testing, scheduling the test, promoting the fix throughout the different environments, getting CAB, Change Advisory Board approval, getting project management approval, and so on. And part of that was because, well, the infrastructure wasn't set up in an ideal way so that that fix could be potentially deployed. So now, right, with DevOps, with the cloud, we have technology as no longer a limiting factor on how fast we can move. It becomes more of a business decision on how fast we can actually move. So that was application DevOps, security of our DevOps pipeline, and an example of that. So that was number 1, infrastructure security. Number 2, DevOps. And the last thing, number 3 that we're going to talk about is security related to our overall application, right? So some application security automation here. And to talk about this, we're going to pick just one example. And specifically, we're going to talk about the WAF, right? The web application firewall a little bit. And specifically, we're going to take a look at AWS's WAF, or they've got a project, right, called AWS WAF Security Automations. And this particular project is on their GitHub repository, free, open source. You can download this. Anybody can use this to deploy the WAF automations project in your AWS account. It comes with CloudFormation templates, of course, for you to deploy, and a number of useful security-related features. Here on this slide, at a high level, is what the WAF from AWS actually does. Right? It blocks SQL injection in the middle, blocks cross-site scripting, it has bad bot and scraper protection. What do we mean by that? Well, you might have a bad bot, somebody that is scanning your website to look for issues. In those particular cases, right, scanner and flood protection, also with known IP attacker, bad IP protection. Each of those, earlier with Cloud Custodian, we saw how Cloud Custodian can utilize Lambda under the covers to kick off a function, to kick off some remediation activity. AWS WAF leverages the exact same concept. On the far left-hand side, people on the internet are accessing your application via the application load balancer, via CloudFront. When they access your app, it results in some logs that get generated that are probably stored in S3. Well, when the WAF detects some potential bad stuff, it then kicks off some Lambda functions. These Lambda functions would run automatically, right? And then either update the list of IPs in the lower right-hand corner that it needs to potentially block, or it might update your access handler to make sure that that bad IP is blocked indefinitely or for some period of time. Right? Automating, again, your response to potential malicious activity here. So similar to what we talked about with infrastructure as code, this is just a snippet, a snapshot of the AWS WAF CloudFormation template to deploy the WAF in your environment. Quick show of hands, anybody played with this WAF automations project before? Just a couple folks. Now, in the middle here, you can see that we've got some yeses and a no. And this is basically saying, what features are we going to enable on this particular WAF? SQL injection protection, yes. Cross-site scripting protection, yes. Flood protection, scanner protection, and so on. So you can modify this template to easily turn on or off different features that you might actually want to leverage. Now, normally, when you are deploying AWS code, CloudFormation templates, you need to do so using, well, a command line command like we see in the lower right-hand corner. AWS CloudFormation deploy, pointing to the specific template file, the YAML file, hopefully, or JSON file that you are using. This screenshot is just showing that similar to how we might automate our application deployment through the Devops CI/CD pipeline, we can also automate our infrastructure deployment. This is a screenshot from Jenkins Blue Ocean, the new Blue Ocean interface, that specifically says instead of you, the engineer, having to call AWS CloudFormation deploy yourself from the command line, or even logging into the console to do so, once you've got your pipeline set up, you can use, well, Jenkins in this example, to automatically deploy even things like a new WAF in your environment as well. So the last simple demo that I want to share here is taking a quick look at the WAF actually blocking some stuff. So if I go ahead and switch back to the VM that we've been looking at, now, it turns out that there's a part of this application that is also vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And I'm going to go ahead and log back in again. And I'm going to go ahead and log in with a different user ID. And it's vulnerable to cross-site scripting on the advanced search page that we see here. Now, of course, quick refresher, cross-site scripting occurs when some bad JavaScript code, some bad code, usually in the form of JavaScript, gets sent up to the server, echoed back down to the browser, and executed, right? That's it. So the attacker can execute arbitrary code in your browser itself. We most commonly test for this by sending the script alert script tag. This code gets sent up to the server, echoed back down to the browser, and in this particular case, we are trying to instruct the browser to simply pop up an alert box, right, that confirms whether or not this JavaScript code is executing locally on the browser. So now if I hit search, you can see, yes, that data, that form submission got sent up to the server, echoed back down, and the alert function got triggered. The browser said, the server's telling me to kick off an alert function to pop up this alert box. So we've just confirmed the standard canonical way to check for the presence of cross-site scripting. So now we know that something bad has happened. Well, under the covers, through the magic of CI/CD, DevOps, we've deployed already in this environment our WAF. Well, for the purposes of the demo, I didn't fully enable the WAF. I didn't turn it on. So you can see this alert box actually popping up. Here, I've got a couple commands. I'm going to go ahead and copy the first one. And this one, if I go ahead and copy it first, is basically from the command line just saying, hey, let's call the WAF and let's associate the web ACL, right, with the ARN that the WAF is looking at, with the, the ALB, the application load balancer that the WAF should be looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And now, it's going to take just a moment to run. Now when it's run, I'm going to go back to my browser. This is the command to basically turn on the WAF. Say that, yes, I want the WAF to be protecting my application. So now if I go back to the advanced search, and I enter that script alert script again, click the search button, you can see that instead of alert popping up the alert box, the WAF has looked at this data first and said, hey, there's some bad cross-site scripting payload in here. Let's go ahead and block the request and prevent that page from actually being displayed. Make sense? All right, so let's go ahead and do the reverse. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the WAF now using this command, the disassociate web ACL. And once I click that, it takes a moment. I'm going to go back to the browser, and you refresh the page. And I'm going to enter that script alert script again. Now, what do you expect to happen in this particular case? What are we going to see when I hit search? Yeah, we're going to see the pop-up. So now that I click search, now that I've turned off the WAF, right? So this shows also not only can you automate deployment of a traditionally complex infrastructure like a WAF. Whoever's deployed a traditional WAF before, you know, well, you've got to talk to the network team. If you've got a traditional network-based WAF, you've got to deploy it on the network. You've got to configure it correctly. Now, through the magic of infrastructure as code and CI/CD, now don't get me wrong, it still takes a bit of work to set this up. But, right, because of infrastructure as code, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more straightforward. And as you just saw, you can easily turn off, toggle on and off your specific protections as well. So with that, I'm going to go back to the slides here. So just in summary, we have talked about 3 different things. Number 1, infrastructure security. specifically looking at Cloud Custodian, how Cloud Custodian has a number of set of rules that help you automate the remediation of certain bad activities, like an overly broad security group. Number 2, we looked at the Devops pipeline, the 5 different phases associated with the pipeline. We saw that some of the security types of things that could be injected at each of the different phases of that pipeline, and talked about Bluegreen Deployment to automate, to make quicker, right, your ability to deploy security fixes. And then finally, we talked about leveraging something like the WAF to automatically block common vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting. Now, real quickly, at the beginning of the session here, I mentioned that some of these concepts, ideas, material is based on the Sec 540 class. There's a number of things. We've added Azure content to this particular class. What's probably most important for our conversation right now is not just about the class, but we have a new coin here that you see some images of over here on the right-hand side. And we also have various stickers. So I have a limited amount of these. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, quite honestly. But feel free to come up. I've got some stickers of these, what I think are kind of cool images here, if you want a sticker for the class. And quick shout out here, later on this year, we also have a Cloud and DevOps Security Summit. The call for papers is open right now. Please do submit your call for papers if you're interested in sharing what you're doing in your organizations. And yeah, that's all I have. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I'll hand it back over to Dave and Ben, and I've got some stickers here. If you guys are interested, I'll be in the back of the room.
Never pass up a free sticker.